Welcome to Changing Minds and Changing Lives, the podcast where we celebrate the innovators and change makers transforming how we work, how we lead, and how we connect on a human level. I am, as always, your humble host, Julie Sowash, CEO of Catch-22 Group and founder and strategic advisor to Disability Solutions. Today, we have quite a treat for you, someone I've been trying to get on the podcast for quite some time. Joining us today is Tara Turk-Haynes, strategist, storyteller, equity activator, and talent leader. Tara is one of those leaders who bring strategy and heart to the world of work, which we massively need. She is a founding member of Hacking HR and a member of Harvard Business Review, which I am a big reader of. She's at the forefront of reimagining modern workplaces, blending, one thing that I love, data, creativity, and inclusion to turn good intentions into actual sustainable results. Tara's been featured in Fast Company, Redefining HR, and on stages like Culture First, and where I got to see her just over the last couple of weeks at RecFest in the United States. And I'm so excited to welcome her. We're going to talk today about some of the ongoing controversy with SHRM and their choice to move away from DEI, and the controversy around their keynote speakers at 2025 SHRM Blueprint Conference. And to wrap it up, I think we're going to try to, we may not have time, move into how SHRM, as they move away from DEI, how that is going to further impact AI bias, and, as I always like to wrap up, what you all can do about it. So after that very lengthy introduction, which I still didn't do her justice on, welcome to Changing Minds, Changing Lives.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm super excited and super excited about this conversation. So thank you for having me in that gorgeous introduction. I'm just going to record it and just at the end. Well,
thank you. I'll take that. So let's talk about you first.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know you. I've been following your work for several years, but tell our listeners about you and of how you got involved in HR and TA strategy, and kind of some of those tangibles about how it's helped you guide companies through to build strategies that are inclusive of DEI and have that DEI lens as a focal point.
Yeah. So I'm a first generation college graduate and first generation corporate worker. When I graduated from college, my I went to get a theater degree as a master's degree. My parents were like, amazing. What are you going to do with that? Because my dad worked on the line for 40 years at Ford before he passed away. My mom has always worked in clerical, and really kind of never advanced further in that. So, I'm their hopes and dreams. I'm supposed to continue on. And, as a playwright, which I, am, and claim, I was like, I can't be an artist and make a living. So I started off like most people in doing administrative work, temping. And then most of my career at the beginning was executive assistant, luckily to C-suite executives, which allowed me to see the business from a really interesting perspective. I think is a lot of times people think administrative assistants are invisible and they treat people that way. And so your true personality comes out as as a person in the company, how you treat administrative assistants. But it allowed me to learn about the business, learn about, personalities, how to navigate. I just did a post on LinkedIn about all the jobs that have helped me get to where I am. And it was definitely one of them, along with babysitter. But it definitely allows you to get almost like an MBA for free, right, when you're an assistant. And so I never knocked those jobs. And I was lucky enough to have a boss, chief people officer of Ticketmaster at the time, Beverly Carmichael, who had come from Southwest. She saw something in me. It was basically like, I think you'd be really great in talent acquisition. And I was like, okay, what is that? And she's like, you're good with people. You know how to talk to people. You have a good, all of these different sort of skills that we kind of take for granted as people. Like when we talk about transferable skills, she embodied exactly what we think when we say a leader should be able to recognize internal mobility and advocate for others. So I started doing talent acquisition from a corporate level. And that began my career as a people person. I, worked in startups. I have worked, mid-sized public companies. So most of my focus has been, talent acquisition in terms of like access for people who sometimes get often ignored. Because when I started temping, I had an agency recruiter when I had dreadlocks tell me I need to comb my hair out if I wanted a really professional job. And I vowed at that point to never, ever, ever make anyone feel like they don't belong. It's really about like, what can you contribute? And I'm always interested in sort of, I hated the power dynamics of companies just being like, we get to tell you what to do and how to show up here. This is a mutual transactional relationship we have, right? You're hiring me because I'm really good at what I do. And I'm here because you should be looking out for the business so we can all work together. And I've always been very passionate about that. And that's been sort of my focus when I think about talent acquisition. And so at some point in 2020, the company I was working for basically was like, after this George Floyd murder, what are we doing? Are we being equitable? Most companies, the same. Everyone had an awakening because we're, pandemic, we're at home, we're, questioning our lives, everything like that. Like, what are we doing? And so I got to implement a strategy that really, truly for me, and it was a work in progress and I was not perfect, but how do I truly make sure people feel like they can be successful no matter what their background is in this company from the time they apply until the time they leave. And so that was my point of view when I was VP of DE&I and talent acquisition at Leaf Group, is how can I make sure people are showing up and we have psychological safety. It really resulted in us having like the highest engagement score in the company. We kept people together during the pandemic. All of our events were very well attended. I was able to bring people like Kat Kibben in and talk, and like it was just, Dr. William Jelani Cobb from MSNBC, who's a good friend of mine. I brought people together to have conversations, and then that reflected in the workplace, so then we could actually improve the workplace. And how I use data basically is like measuring everything. I honestly got to know that data could be the best storyteller that you have. I feel like people walk into a company and they think their feelings are facts, right? I feel like our company is disengaged. Your feeling is so biased. What are you using to actually measure that? Why do you need to measure that? Because we spend time, money, and resource on feelings is a poor business strategy. I want to be able to put something into something that allows us to see what our ROI is. So we can't ignore data. We can't ignore that kind of strategy. And that's why I believe that people's strategy is so very important to business strategies. And that's why, I started my company. It's been really great. I've been working with people across many different industries. It's a learning lesson for me across the board. No one size fits all. But, it's been a great journey for me, and I'm really grateful to be on it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I just want to call out one thing, just because I've been having this conversation a lot and I'm hearing it a lot from younger Gen Z, workers as they're coming in, is that where you started, is not where you're finishing.
Right.
And I remember feeling the same way when I was, 25, like, hey, I'm not a VP yet. Why is this, I've failed at life. Might as well just pack it up. But taking away all of the things or all of these lessons in your journey make you better at your job now. It makes you successful as your own company, your own entity. And I think that's just such an important thing for all of us to take away. Mm-hmm. But that it really is that journey. And I appreciate you saying that, mostly because it's on my heart, because I got 3 Gen Zs at home. But I think for our community too, as you're thinking about entering the workforce, re-entering the workforce, know that there's something unique that you should be taking away from your current job.
Yes.
That's going to apply as your career grows. So thank you for that. And thanks for like the detail. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about your Ticketmaster background. Yeah, though. I mean, that's so great. So like, again, when we're talking about modeling behaviors, pulling in your talent that's, they're filing, listening, setting schedules, learning about budgets, doing all of this incredible work that never really gets recognized. And that's such a skill in leadership.
It really is. And I love what you said about your journey. And I sometimes tell people, I do some coaching, not a lot of it, usually for, really special cases. But I tell people to think of it as when you're traveling, right? If I'm going to go to a country, I want to know, what experiences do I want to have? What food do I want to know about? What people do I want to know about? Your jobs are almost like that, right? You're experiencing something to take on to the next adventure that you have. And so gone are there days where, my parents were boomers and like I said, my dad was at Ford for 40 years. I think it was his only job. Like that absolutely, absolutely never happens anymore. So where you think like, how come I haven't reached this opportunity yet? It might not be the place for you to reach that opportunity. And that's fine. You just need to take out something that really is valuable for you so you can bring it to the next position.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So
Yes.
now let's talk about the controversy of the day. Not that there's not a bazillion we could talk about. But I want to talk about what's happening at SHRM right now. And as I mentioned before we were recording, just doing our prep session, because we've got a really diverse audience, there may be some of our listeners who don't know what SHRM is.
Yeah.
And don't know why it's important as an entity for not just getting a job, but for understanding how underrepresented communities are moving through talent acquisition and HR. So can you give us like I don't know, however long you want to take overview of SHRM and why they're important to job seekers?
Yeah. So SHRM is a Society for Human Resources Management. And for many years, they have been the epitome, right, organization representing human resource professionals. With a little bit of marketing, a lot of advocacy, a lot of lobbying, right? Because they also represent HR professionals in front of governments, there is no other HR organization that does that, which is huge. They, when business leaders do not know if somebody is going to be good at the HR leader or HR job that they post, maybe they do it once, they have one HR person or whatever. Previously, if somebody had those certifications that SHRM offered, that told that business leader, okay, I've got somebody who knows exactly what they're doing. It's just like CPA or any kind of thing like that, right? The problem, right, that we now have is that there's a monopoly. They have a monopoly on representing HR professionals, and their values are starting to slowly misalign with a lot of members of the community. Now that we have Johnny Taylor as the head of SHRM, who's been there for a few years at this point, they have it seems as though they have bended the knee towards whatever administration is in office at that moment and taken on the perspectives of that administration. And currently, this current one that we have is not very friendly towards the LGBTQ community, the trans community, anyone who is not, Black women or, Black men for that matter. They have no interest in sort of dealing with any kind of the socioeconomic identities, 40 plus of them that we all can have, right? There's 40 plus of them. And so just because, and I think when people talk about DE&I, since I've overseen it, the thing that I always hear is people think is just race and it's just gender and maybe your sexuality. We are talking ageism. We're talking about veterans. We are talking about English as a first, second language. We're talking about socioeconomic, like how did you grow up, poor, rich? Well, all of these different things make up who you are as an individual. And that's really incredibly important if you are an HR professional within the workplace to acknowledge that, because your workplace is made up of those people. So SHRM has decided to remove, the diversity and equity piece. Equity is so important because equity is not about like, diversity is like how many different people we have, right? Equity is, are we all having the same experience together, no matter what our background is. So for an HR organization to say we don't want to deal with equity is a problem, right? Because that means people in the workplace, we don't care if you are a veteran's wife, we don't care if you're having the same experience as, so-and-so who graduated from an Ivy League school, because though there may be inequities in how you're gotten the job, how you're treated, we as an HR organization are not going to deal with that. And that is a huge problem because it's not going to go away. It's just that you don't want to talk about it. So, now we're in this place where SHRM has become, the de facto, if business leaders see these certifications, they're just like, this is a great HR person. And it's not true. There are a lot of people who great on the job experience. You could be an HR professional for 20 years and never get a SHRM certification and probably know a ton more than that person. How to be on the job experience is really important. Secondly, who else is going to advocate for us in front of government agencies, right? So if we're talking about trans rights, if we're talking about, the 300 plus Black women who've been pushed out of the workplace since, this administration has come in, who's advocating for us? This organization has decided not to. So that's a problem, right? Because there is no other organization. And how do we, and I think that's what has been on my mind, is like, how do we bring light to that? One of the things I've been asking is business leaders to stop putting SHRM certifications on their job descriptions for HR professionals. That doesn't necessarily mean that someone has the experience that you're looking for. I'd rather you be a lot more specific about like, what is it you're actually looking for? Don't blanket it under a SHRM certification. Also, they have an amazing local chapters who are at odds with the national organization. And how do we best support those local chapters who really believe in all of these advocacy rights and everything so that their voices are heard? So there's a lot of different conversations we should be having, but we're at a crossroads, right? So who's going to represent us in the way that allows us all to have our voice equally heard?
Yeah, I think that is such a good and robust explanation of the power that SHRM carries. And I remember when I first kind of got into this work more than a decade ago now, thinking, oh, I'm not an HR person. I'm a disability consultant. I'm a tech person. I'm a process person. I'm a compliance person, but I probably should get my SHRM certification so people take me seriously.
Yeah.
And there's such an air of, it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels like such a, like, if you're not a member, it's very elitist. Like, we don't want you. If you're not a member, we don't take you as seriously. If you don't have that certification. And I'm not like dissing certifications. I think that having some sort of demonstration of how we do the work is not a bad thing, to have. But as I've sort of watched the organization evolve over the last, let's say, 5 to 6 years, I've become quite concerned. And I don't think this is controversial. I don't really care because I just sort of say what I think. But under John C. Taylor's leadership, what I've seen, I would say even at a broader level or a higher level than just moving away from DEI, is that that the tone is almost anti-worker.
Yeah.
And the couple of times that I've been at an event where I've been able to sit in and hear Mr. Taylor speak, that was my takeaway.
Yeah.
Is people don't want to show up for work. People don't want to do this. People want the, laborers to represent them. They want to get paid more. They don't deserve that. And we're all in human resources.
Right.
And so to have basically the largest advocacy and education organization in the world, probably, I mean, at least in the country, but probably in the world, educating and reinforcing the lack of value that the employee brings to the company is
a problem.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And it's interesting because it's so ingrained. They're so dug in based on prior reputations about what they do, that some companies only fund their HR professionals to go to a SHRM certification once a year. They won't even pay for HR people to go to other conferences that probably have a lot more ROI than SHRM. And that's a huge problem too. So you're saying the only thing you're going to pay for is that person to gather with other people under a environment, like you said, that is so anti-worker. And that's the reason why our voices are really important, is because we need to let a lot of the business leaders know that that's not the way we want to be represented, and giving more power to local chapters allowing other certification or conferences to be able to get, be on the docket for you to get reimbursed or get more professional development in conferences that really will give you actually what you need to be a better HR professional. We have to stop saying that SHRM's, their PRs, like it's the best and the most elite. And you're right. A lot of, and I know because the SHRM test is not easy. I know this for a fact, but it's not a reason for you to then treat other people as though if they don't have a certification that they don't belong, because we are all in human resources and we really need to stick together and address the problems of our actual people within the organization, right? And be equipped to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point. And I do also appreciate you calling out the importance of the local chapters, because you're 100% right. I talked to local SHRM leaders who are not aligned with where national's going. And let's be honest, like politics, we talk about what happens at the federal level.
Yeah.
And that's critically important. But so much of the good work, that critical work, gets done locally. And so kudos to those SHRM leaders that are doing the work and really striving to keep or to get SHRM inclusive and engaged and human first. And so you mentioned just a little bit when you were giving your overview. So several years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3, SHRM decided to move from DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and to go to I and D. So inclusion and diversity.
Yeah.
And it was such an odd move
Mm-hmm.
in terms of where did this come from? Why did they make this decision? Who were they trying to please with with this move? And it just felt so out of the blue to me and not aligned with anything that we were seeing at the moment. Did you have the same reaction, or is there something I missed?
I was not surprised because I believe that the organization, again, models the behavior of the administration. And as soon as the election was over, I knew that there would be a lot of companies that were going to transition. The companies that were doing it because it was performative were going to remove DEI with a quickness, like literally just I don't want it. The companies that didn't have the resources to fight the administration, because the administration has definitely put a war on DE&I because they've weaponized what diversity, equity, inclusion means, and given misinformation on those definitions, and people have ran with that. They don't want, I'm use slang. They don't want that smoke, so they're just trying to I don't want to use my legal team and all of my company's resources to fight this thing. So either I'm going to go underground or I'm going to remove it completely. We're just going to do the work. And listen, I don't fault any of them. I tell some of my clients who do this work, I don't need you to do a press release about how great you are when it comes to advocating for people across the board when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want you to just do the work. I don't care if you get acknowledged for it. But the rumor being that Johnny Taylor wanted a position in his, the cabinet of this administration, and doing whatever he could as a leader of this HR organization to show that he could be that, was not surprising to me. I do feel like that was a move towards pleasing, the government that they show up in front of and repeat, inaccurately the current HR environment, which really bothers me as well. So what they said was they are folding equity into DI, which is impossible because they all kind of three exist separately. They all have separate functions. Diversity is one thing, equity and inclusion is another thing. And equity is the one thing that actually moves the needle for people. It makes sure your pay is equitable, right? Mm-hmm. It makes sure your performance reviews, how your boss treats you. Equity is the part that actually allows you to show up within the organization and make you feel like, okay, we're on some level of a playing field here. Inclusion is how you feel about that, right? Diversity is basically how many people can show up and say the same thing. So to remove the piece that actually moves the needle was not surprising to me.
Yep. And I'm so glad you said that because I had forgotten about the trying to get in the cabinet. You're totally right. I remember that.
Yep.
And and that's a representation of what's best for him, not what's best for the organization. Okay, so as we're recording this, it's October 27th tomorrow, depending on when you're listening to this, October 28th, 2025. SHRM is holding a conference called SHRM Blueprint. And SHRM Blueprint, I think, is new. It's not one I had heard of before, but it's kind of like their new DEI SHRM, inclusion, I guess, show. And to kick off this incredible new way of looking at DEI, Johnny C. Taylor has invited two incredibly controversial individuals to be the keynote for the event, and that will happen on October 28th in the morning. So if you're listening to this after, we probably have some more strong opinions about it than we do now, and that's going to be saying something. So tomorrow morning, Robby Starbuck and Van Jones are going to be joining a moderated conversation with SHRM CEO Johnny C. Taylor to talk about how to engage everyone, how to hear other thoughts, and be open to those as part of our I&D programs. And so let's talk about first Van Jones. So I know Van Jones from my days of watching CNN when he was a Democratic strategist and didn't always agree with things that Van had to say, but didn't really in that time period find him to be very controversial. Now that has changed, or there are things that I didn't know about. And so I want to start with, and again, to ensure that we are not just favoring one side versus the other, but to say that both of these gentlemen have past and comments that are concerning.
Yeah.
What does Van bring to the table, and what are some of, if you were picking a SHRM speaker, what caveats would you say maybe Van's not the right person to be having this conversation with?
So historically, and I was thinking about this before our conversation, Van and Johnny Taylor to me are similar in that their backgrounds, they're like chameleons. Their backgrounds are going to match the environment that they're in, right? Van, started off really strong, community organizer, was in Barack Obama's cabinet, has some really esteemed, organizing organizations, the Ella Baker Foundation, Color of Change. Like he's worked in some really incredible places. And that transition to media pundit or media personality, I think is where the transition kind of became perplexing. In that as soon as you get on television, I have friends who are on these political shows and your point of view has to be very strong. And the only way you keep getting booked is if you can say something that lands, that's very strong. Sometimes they don't always agree with it, right? We can look at some of these talking head shows. I wish we would get back to reporting journalism, but that's another show altogether. Right now, we're just listening to a lot of people have a lot of opinions about different things, but you have to stand out in that group. And I think Van has done whatever he can to be able to stand out in that group, including saying things that are incredibly polarizing at some point. I will say for a lot of the members of the Black community that I belong to, they do not necessarily see him as a representative of who we are. He is wishy-washy at times. I remember, when Trump got elected, he went full throttle and saying that that was a very presidential, that. Like we were just like, excuse me, like did we all listen to the same thing? Whether you agree or not, but like the switch was so quick that we're like, are you? What are you actually listening to, and are you placating to be able to stay relevant, right? Most recently has had a huge controversy about the Gazan children image, starving Gazan children image, and saying it was misinformation that benefited other, countries. And really, it was on Bill Maher, and he got attacked for, like, he literally was just like, you cannot, how can you fall for these kinds of things when you have such a prestigious background as someone like Ella Baker, who is like pivotal to the Black community in terms of organization, in your bio? How are you coming on television and saying something so incredibly wrong and misinformed? So it's like, it's slippery. It's untrustworthy, this voice that we're using. And I'm not surprised, because what we're doing is they're presenting a conversation with people who don't necessarily have very strong differing opinions or views, right? Like, if I can't trust what Van is ascertaining, Robby Starbuck is not going to be somebody that, like, I will ever agree with as well. And Johnny Taylor, again, similarities in Van Jones's background, right? Johnny Taylor, candidly was the head of HR when I was at Ticketmaster, because IAC owned Ticketmaster. So I've interacted with Johnny. Johnny was an amazing person back then. It definitely advocated for people. So there again has been this transition that's different, right? This is not the person I feel like that started off. And now we're in this other place. And so we're having a conversation with three people who I think are not going to have very strongly different pieces of information, right? I don't think, and there isn't one person who's going to say, you're wrong, Robby Starbuck. We can talk a little bit about who Robby Starbuck is at some point. And I can't believe that you're saying these horrific things about, these communities that we all have friends and loved ones who belong to, especially when we're talking about the workplace. There isn't going to be somebody on that stage who's going to say, you can't say that. That's ridiculous. And that's what worries me.
So I think that is I just want to stop and capture that for a minute, because what you've said, I think, is, if I could pick the number one problem,
Yeah.
and I'm sort of talking off the top of my head, so bear with me, guys, is that it's the chameleon. It is the weakness of trying to stay relevant instead of living by what your values were, at least we think were at White Slate, right? And maybe it's always been the chameleon and it's always gone with the times. But as I'm looking at, frankly, companies we've worked with for a long time, companies I've respected, companies that I know were committed to doing the work, just walk away from it. And that, to me, that is the biggest insult, the biggest, kind of slap to the face of people who are in underrepresented communities and to workers in general, is that this wishy-washy, we just go with it. And people like Robby Starbuck, they are who they are.
Yes.
They're unapologetically who they are.
Yeah.
And when you have someone who will live and die on the hill that they believe in, whether it's right or wrong, those people move others.
Yeah.
And when we have leaders who are just willing to go with the tide, then people get tired of hearing it. People don't want to be a part of an organization. They don't want to be part of a movement that is not based on a firm foundation of, this is what we are and this is what we believe.
Mission and values are incredibly important. And I think we should get into who Robby Starbuck is for those who don't know. Is like, literally was a video producer director whose child came home and talked about the lesson that they learned and how it was about, I believe it was about, it was LGBTQ in nature, and was so enraged that his child was learning about people who have a difference in their background, and so offended that he decided to devote his entire professional career and personal by going after companies who had DEI programs. He is, and has no experience, by the way, in any of these programs. He was, like I said, a video producer and director, and just researched, quarterly annual reports. Any company who was reporting on any kind of measurement when it came to data and demographics, specifically those who had LGBTQ plus community programs for their workers there, so that they felt seen, secure, psychologically safe, was outraged and just kept building a social media audience that allowed him to go after them with a vengeance. We can say that some companies did not bend the knee. They will still, he can be an activist in his own mind, but I don't know if that's what the word that I would use. And because the sentiment of his target is shared by this administration, he's gotten a lift, right? So that there is no government organization that's going to say, you've got to stop this because you are discriminating against other people, right? Yep. That barrier has been removed because he has shared sentiment. So even though he does not belong to the LGBTQ community, he has nothing to do with it. He just doesn't want that kind of awareness to be in a workplace because that's just not what he wants. And so, and there are a lot of other people he thinks who feel the same way. So again, nothing to do with you. You can't let people live their lives, have their beautifully diverse backgrounds, show up at work so they can contribute to their success in the best way possible. Let companies know that these people are welcome. You are going to target those specific companies and say really heinous and horrendous things on social media. If you want to go to his social media, you can. I blocked him because protecting my nervous system. I don't need to see that. So, to have someone share that stage, I do think the interesting thing is, like, a lot of people have been talking about how awful SHRM has been since, for a few years now. But this recent conversation has awakened some people, I think, who weren't aware before, right? I've seen people left and right commenting on LinkedIn about how they're canceling their SHRM memberships because this is just too far. Because the world is changing. We all have somebody in our lives that we love dearly who belongs to this community and other communities, because we know we don't target just one. We target other ones, right? When we have fear-based racism, misogyny, homophobia, it's always somebody else is always going to be the target. We have people that we love and protect viciously. And so this has to be a line in the sand for a lot of people. And I've seen them say, like, this is a bridge too far. This is it. I can't do this.
I think that there's so much to unpack. We could probably just do an entire conversation on this.
Yeah.
Well, last year, so just prior to the election, I did a webinar that talked about basically kind of what are our three kind of barriers or impediments that we're going to see in 2025 if the administration changed over to what it is now. And one of the first pieces is the stick, right? So we've lost affirmative action. We have taken the teeth out of Section 503, out of 4212. We have lost the agency.
Yes.
In all but name,
mm-hmm.
that actually does the work of making sure that proactively companies are engaging talent with a variety of backgrounds to get an equitable hiring process that allows companies to capture people that they otherwise wouldn't. And then the second one is really where Robby Starbuck came in, is the PR, right? So it's the voice of it. And I love what you said, because oftentimes when I talk to the team at DS, I'm like, we just need to put our head down and do the work. The results speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And so we're now at this point where we are losing marketing's interest in it, right? We're losing that second pillar of like, well, if I can't put out a press release for it, what is really the point of doing it kind of thing, right? And Robby Starbuck specifically, I thought it was really interesting, targeted late last year brands that are male dominated type of brands, like a Harley Davidson, like Caterpillar, John Deere, those masculine. If you could see me, I'm air quoting everything I'm saying here. Those masculine brands, because he felt that it was a disservice to men for those brands to engage in supporting their LGBTQ workforce, their Black workforce, their disabled workforce. And I don't know where we lose in the conversation about young white men that, or young men, period, is that they're also disabled. They're also people of color. They're also LGBTQ individuals. And ignoring that doesn't make a man or a brand more masculine. And that, to me, I mean, I've read some of his tweets this morning about the director of the Louvre, and I just nonsense. But what is your take, if you're having these conversations? What is your take on how to have I don't want to say a productive, you can't have a productive conversation with someone like him, but how do you educate the people that you're working with about how to help them understand from both a brand and a workforce perspective that being inclusive of others is not being uninclusive of men?
So a couple things, first off, I'll say I would never have a conversation with Robby Starbuck because he's committed to, he's dug deep. And I think where a lot of us have wasted very valuable time, energy, resource, resilience, and hope is trying to convince people who are very much committed to not engaging in any kind of conversation about other people's humanity. If I have to convince you of other people's humanity, I'm wasting my time. This is a lost cause. I have conversations with people who are genuinely curious about how to be better and what their lived experience has not taught them that they would love to know about other people. But one of the things I do is in my business is I say, this makes complete business sense for you. The census is changing. Just because you don't want to talk about how intersectional other people are, into intersectional, for those who don't know, that means you have multiple of these social identities we talked about, just like you just said, Julie, which is, you can be a man and be part of the LGBT community and be a veteran, right? And be English as a second language and not come from a lot of money. So that's 4 different things, right? You can be multiple things we are talking about when we talk about DEI, right? Multiple things. To create a monolith, an idea of what just one person looks like, is doing a disservice, and your business is going to falter. You will not be able, if you feel like you can have a homogenous business, I tell people, by all means, go for it. You don't want to change. You don't want other customers or future employees to be able to see themselves thriving, engaging with your business. By all means, do whatever you think is best. If you're the kind of person who is looking 10, 15, 20 years down the line about how my business can still exist, then you better start thinking about how to cater to other people who don't necessarily just look like you immediately, right? Because these younger generations that are entering the workforce do not have the same patience, I think, that other generations who have been in the workforce for a long time. We are, I'm young Gen X. I am literally just still unlearning some really bad habits that the boomers who also learned from other generations. We were not taught that we had power. The younger generations who are coming into the workplace definitely are carving out their own power. They're not going to stand for a lot of this stuff. And I'm not saying that they all believe, very much into DEI, diversity, whatever. But I am saying a lot of them are recognizing all of the different parts of who they are themselves, and they want to go someplace that represents that and allows them to really be successful in an organization. And if you are not that organization, I do not want to hear your think pieces about why it's so hard to find good talent. I just don't want to do that. So, I'm working with organizations who are like, we're trying to plan for the future, and we're doing that presently. If you're a company that doesn't want to do that, that's fine. And I'll really quick story, John Deere, which is one of the companies that you mentioned. I had a friend who did a beautiful documentary on the plight of Black farm workers and on on Black land rights, which have been historical in our country. That basically means, African Americans who had family members in the South who may have had land, whether it's because of, racism or Jim Crow or whatever, not very well documented. How are they able to keep their land rights? A lot of it has been stolen from them. Beautiful documentary. Why? Because their chief diversity officer was a Black man who was going through that very thing with land rights. As soon as this administration came into play, as soon as Robby Starbuck came, that man was fired. That documentary exists, but we are talking about the beauty is that some of those John Deere customers who are Black farmers saw that John Deere cared about them, that they recognized that they were customers, right? And they could proudly say, I have John Deere. John Deere did something that reflects my identity. Now that's gone. You might lose an entire swath of customers because you decided to bend the knee, right? Yeah. That makes terrible business sense to me.
Yeah, and Robby Starbuck really pushes that DEI is not good for ROI.
Yeah.
And we know that's bullshit.
Right.
We know that.
Yeah.
And time and time and time again, the data proves that that story is wrong.
Correct.
But if we're not using our voices collectively, that's the voice that gets heard. And I think that's, when we go back to the wishy-washy and all of those things, it's like facts are facts.
Right.
And this fact is untrue.
Right.
And this fact is true. And we need leaders who are going to continue to do that. And what Van Jones, presumably, and certainly as demonstrated over time, Johnny C. Taylor, are not going to do is push back and make that point. And nobody wants to get on board with those guys.
No, yeah, that is exactly the point I was going to make. There's no reason to think that Van Jones or Johnny C. Taylor are going to bring up why Black farmers now may not support John Deere anymore. Right.
Yeah.
We're talking about immigration right now. We're talking about, ICE raids, right? All of these companies who are not doing anything. I mean, living in the present, and we are talking about a conversation where we know 3 of those individuals are probably not going to bring up repercussions of the current administration and the current efforts to do a lot of erasure of a workforce that truly is important to the vitality of this country. They're not going to bring up the important details about this. And so when you talk about using your voice, I know a lot of people are probably out there like, well, what can I do? I'm just an individual. Small moments every single day. If you are working at a company and you see that they post an HR job and it says SHRM certified, SHRM certificate required, say something. Tell them, hey, I don't know if you know, but a lot of people are not happy with SHRM as a national organization right now, right? If you're in talent acquisition, you don't have to, shout from the rooftops that you're running an equitable process. You should be doing that anyway, but still continue to do that, right? Seek the humanity in people. If you're in HR, still, when there are rough days, right? When the news is really rough and you know that there are people who might be affected by those headlines, can you just say, hey, you know what? If you can knock off a couple hours early, I know it's been a rough day, or if you need somebody to talk to, or if there's resources that you need, we really have to get back to connecting to people, because things like the SHRM certification and the SHRM Association is not doing a great job for the PR of HR, right? Like the more HR people talk to each other and pat each other on the back, job well done, guarantee you there's a lot of employees out there who are still like, I would never trust HR.
Yeah. But we talk to them every day.
Yep. Every single day. Right. Exactly. And I think that gap needs to shrink in order for us to actually have a collective voice to do something against an organization like SHRM.
Yeah. So I think that is the perfect place to wrap up on. We're going to have to do AI next time if you'll come back for another session.
Love to.
Okay.
Love to.
Wonderful, wonderful. So if you can tell our audience how to get connected with you, where to follow you, all the good things.
Yes. My website, equityactivations.com. You can contact me through there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Threads. I am on Instagram and on TikTok.
Excellent. Tara, thank you so much for joining us, guys. This was such a fun episode. We'll have to, I don't know, debrief after everything happens tomorrow and report back after this is published. So thank you again for joining us. Guys, have a wonderful day. Catch up on some back episodes. We've had some great conversations this year, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Julie.